that you mute yourselves, because like right now I'm hearing somebody in the background of somebody's. Okay. So you all make sure you're muted so we don't hear whatever's going on in the background. All right. So this is about, okay, so we're recording. So we're going to do a little unit this week on the process of putting a production together. So I put some slides together. Today we're going to focus on just the selection of a play or a show, okay? And there are some questions on Canvas you can answer afterwards, but let me go to the, okay, so there's a new module, producing and appreciating plays and musicals. You've got your lesson, your bell ringer, and there's the production process PowerPoint that I'm going to open, and there are process questions. I should have labeled that questions 1 because there's more to it. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about the production process. Okay. Oops, what happened? Use your tablet as a remote. No thanks. Okay. All right, so what we're going to talk about first is selecting the play, or today, okay? So before casting, before rehearsals, before the play is announced, someone or a group must decide what the play or musical will be. This is mainly the responsibility of the director, okay? So the director's job is usually to take care of the artistic side of the production, but at different levels like high school or civic theater, it can also include all the production elements too, such as funding, advertising, etc. So a lot of what your textbook talks about with this section is they're looking at it from a high school perspective. If we're talking about a professional production of a show, anything as, have any of you been to the Round Barn Theater to see a show over in Napanee at Amish Shakers?
I have.
Oh, you have, okay. Well, that is actually, those are professional actors. Now, not like a Broadway touring company or somebody on Broadway. They are local actors that are paid to perform, okay? And that kind of a production usually has some kind of business manager, maybe a producer, besides the director. I'm not sure with Amish Acres what all kinds of levels they had. I'd have to look back at one of my old scripts, or not scripts, programs from there to see all of that. If you go to a professional show in Chicago, like I've been to a few of them, like Wicked, sometimes it's a touring company. In Chicago, you also sometimes have shows that will stay there for months. Like before you guys were born, Joseph and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's one of Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's first musicals. It was in Chicago for several months, for about a year, actually, I think. Being performed as the lead performer was Donny Osmond. He was playing the main character. And that is a company that, that particular show had producers as well as directors, and they had business managers and choreographers and costume designers and all kinds of people making those decisions. And, you know, there was a set director possibly and things like this. But at the high school level or middle school level, or even sometimes at like a local civic, we call it a civic theater. I'm not sure if that's always the appropriate term, but it's like a repertory theater where the people, like in high school, they're just adults doing it. They're not being paid. They're not professional actors. They, they hear, oh, hey, we're doing this show, we're looking for people to perform, and they'll audition. But most of the time, you have several people doing different jobs, but on the level like high school, the director, like me, is also in charge of a lot of things that in a bigger production, in a bigger, a professional setting, other people would take on those roles. So, like I was saying, the director's job is usually to take care of the artistic side, but at different levels, it can also include all the production elements such as funding and advertising and so forth. Like when we're working on a show, I'm usually the one, I have to go, and now graphics will do them for me, but I have to go talk to them about, hey, let's put a poster together, and they'll come up with designs for me. And then I'll have to contact, maybe the radio and the newspaper and have kids go put posters out and things like this. So we've got advertising out for our show. And I'll have to figure out what our budget is. How much money can we actually spend? Or how much do I think we'll take in? Okay. So I have to do all of those things. And we'll talk about the other responsibilities here. Okay. So we want to talk first of all about how we choose what the play or the musical is. So at the high school level, and the professional level, if you're doing something on Broadway, a lot of these things they don't have to consider because they can look for whatever kinds of actors they want. But at the high school level, when we're choosing a play or musical, the director has to think about the school and community and what would be acceptable, because there are shows that are done by some schools in big cities that in a more rural area like this, the audience would say, well, what are you doing that for? That's not appropriate, okay? Which is fine. You have to know, I know as someone who's been doing this for a long time in this area, I know what shows, what I could say, what I can't have kids say, okay? So you have to think about the school and the community and what would be acceptable, okay? Then you also need to think about the cast size. And that depends on your talent and available cast. And as I said in here, a director who's been at the school for a few years will have an idea of who might try out, who's been in past shows. And I will say this, schools tend to have a lot more girls than boys that audition. We always seem to be short boys. Now there have been, we did hit a few years where I had a really nice selection of talented boys I could count on who could act and sing. And so those were years I would pick shows, especially with the musicals, that had more boys in it. And I would save the shows that were more girl heavy for the years when I didn't have those boys. Okay? And that is typically what schools will do. Unless you're in a really, really big school that doesn't have any problem with girls and guys auditioning, then you have to look at those things. We also have to consider what our talent base is. Like, do I have, I'm not going to say, okay, we're going to do Les Miserables when I know I don't have at least 5 or 6 boys with really good voices to sing the different parts that the boys have to sing, because it's very much a male show. You have 4 women in the show that have larger roles than the chorus, okay? Also need to consider the budget. How much money can you spend? And we're going to be talking about royalty fees and copyrights and things like that in a minute. But there is an expense to putting on a show because you have to pay for maybe paints and maybe some props and maybe some costuming. It depends on how you do your costuming. And then you also have to think about how much is the show itself going to cost. In plays, we usually buy scripts and then we have to pay royalty fees, and we'll talk about that in a minute. With a musical, we pay rental fees for the show. And a musical, the cost of just renting the materials and the royalty fees is usually much higher, okay? So we have to think about that, and if the play is available. Sometimes, like Grease is a very, very popular musical, and it's not always easy to get the rights to do it because a lot of schools do it, and there are things that, you know, you have to look at the availability, and they don't like, you know, if North Judson and I were to try, and Knox were to try and do the same musical, they may not give us both the rights to it because we're right here beside each other, okay? So they look at what's available, who's able, you know. And then you also need to look at the needs of the sets and the costumes and so forth. Is it something that we could put together? Is our stage big enough for it? Do we, you know, if we were going to do, now we did do Peter Pan one year. Peter Pan and Wendy and Michael and John always fly. We weren't, I think we talked about this one time, that we don't have the kind of ceiling in our auditorium to use fly rigging. So we had to think of an alternative way to fly them, okay? And what kind of elaborate costumes might you need? Or maybe they're not so elaborate. So I'll give you another example of that. We did the Three Musketeers one fall for our play. I didn't have to worry about finding musketeer costumes and the artificial swords and things, because Mr. Sullivan, who's in the graphics department, had all of those things. He's been collecting costumes and making costumes for years. He also has a lot of Renaissance era costumes, medieval period stuff, even some chainmail that he's made. So if I'm doing anything with knights and princesses and things like that, or the Three Musketeers, I knew where I could get them, down to the hats and everything, and we didn't have to pay anything to rent them. And he also used to have a fencing club, and he had kids, he had students who had been in fencing club, and they taught the other kids how to fence and choreographed the fight scenes. And it worked. It was something we could do. I also had a lot of boys that year too. And so it was something that we were able to do because I knew someone that had the costumes, we had this available and that available. And so we did it, okay? But you have to consider all of those things. So again, at the high school level, what's acceptable to the school and community? What kind of talent and available cast do you have? So then you have to look at the cast size, your budget, availability of the play, the needs of the sets, the costumes, etc. Okay? So then, obtaining permission, okay? Unless the director, student, or other staff member has written an original script, you have to get permission to perform a show from whoever owns the rights to it. So a copyright is the registration of ownership of a piece of literature or music. Every play that is written and published, every musical that is written and published, every song written and published has a copyright, okay? So it's showing it's the ownership of the person who created it, or sometimes the people who created it. So a royalty is a fee that's charged for each time the show is produced, okay? And a portion of this goes to the playwright, which helps him or her earn a living. So who wrote the play? Or in the case of a musical, royalty fees are higher because you have not only a playwright, you have a songwriter. The songwriter has a partner, one who writes the music and one who writes the lyrics. And you might have had somebody else who did the orchestrations and things like this. So you've got several people who are getting a portion of that royalty fee. A typical play, the royalty fee might be anywhere from $50 to $100 for the first performance. And then the fees, usually the second or third performance, are cheaper. Same thing is kind of true. Well, no, musicals, it's usually one fee per production, per performance rather. Okay. So that's what those things mean. Okay. So every time we do a show, we have to look at the royalty fees and we have to get permission. And we have to, we do that through the company that owns the rights to it or is taking care of the rights to it. And there are different companies that do that. With musicals, the big ones are Music Theater International and Rodgers and Hammerstein. There are a couple others there's also, oh my gosh. Tams Whitmark is another one that has the rights to a lot. Those three tend to have the rights to most of the musicals, or that's how you get permission through those companies. But whatever you do, like again, unless somebody wrote an original script, you have to get permission to perform it. Otherwise, you could be up on copyright charges and paying much bigger fees than you normally would. Okay? All right, let's see. Okay, so then another part of it, we talked about the director has to make a lot of those decisions. So we want to talk about the director's concept. So this is the director's overall concept of the play or musical. It involves interpreting the work, imagining the finished performance, characterization, costuming, movement, sets, lighting, props, scenery. Okay, and I put a picture up there of a set from a show. I'm not really sure what show it is. Looks a little bit like maybe Cinderella or something like that. But guys, the other part of it is when I was talking about, picking the show itself, and considering who you have. Like I've had kids when Hairspray first came out, they're like, oh my gosh, we need to do Hairspray. We also have to consider the population of your school. It's not, and how your school is made up. Or West Side Story, that becomes a problem because we usually don't have enough boys for it again. So those are just things that we have to think about. All right, so interpreting the work. That means that the director has to read the play, study it, and figure out how he or she, what you want the show to look like. All right. The characterization. How do you want the characters portrayed? A lot of those things will be written in the script. Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. And sometimes they're just suggestions to you. Like sometimes I've run across in scripts, it'll say, play this in a humorous way, or this should be taken, this is not supposed to be sarcastic, but it just depends on the show. And often they'll give you a description of characters. Again, more of that seems to show up in a play than in a musical. I mean, they'll have some descriptions of the characters, but you kind of seem to have to interpret it more in the reading, or you'll see productions of it already. They're usually musicals that you're familiar with. Costuming. How do you imagine the costuming looking as the director? And if there's there's always movement in a play, but whether that is dance movement or whether it is how what we call block the play out, where people move, where they stand in relationship to each other. Because we talked a little bit about this before, that you want to create pleasing stage pictures. Okay? You want to create several pleasing pictures on stage. So you have to think about the movement of the actors and where they need to be standing, when they should exit, what kind of other small movements should they do. And then, of course, what your sets are going to look like, the lighting, the props, the scenery. It's always nice, and a lot of times a play will be a one set production, meaning that you don't have to do a bunch of scene changes. Or if you do, it's very small changes like moving a piece of furniture. With a musical, there are usually multiple scene changes, and you have to have different set pieces for it. The Little Mermaid, which we did a couple of years ago. In The Little Mermaid, we had a lot of the scenes that were underneath the water. There were a couple of them. We had pieces that, there was Ursula's lair, and there was Triton's lair, and there was Ariel's room. So there are 3 different underwater sets. There were also some scenes where Ariel was up on a rock. So we had to have something like that. And then there was a big scene on the ship. We had to figure out how we were going to do that. And then there are scenes inside Prince Eric's castle. And so you have to figure out how to do all of those things on stage. Okay. And you have to constantly, if things can be moved easily, we move them. Or some musicals, we've done one set and just pulled little pieces on, like when we did Seussical several years ago. I don't know if any of you remember coming to see a production of Seussical when you were little. With Seussical, we had one set. What are we doing? Okay. So with Seussical, we had a set that had different levels. It had stairs going up the side, and there was a big platform, so we could move kids to different levels. And in fact, Mr. Heiss, Senor Heiss, played a monkey, one of the monkey brothers, when we did Seussical, and he and his other monkey brother had to jump off part of the platform. He could probably tell you about that. Yeah, guys, you didn't need to be making comments like this. She was just saying she has a shirt. So you have to think about all of this. What kind of scenery are you going to use? What kind of props are you going to use? What's the lighting going to look like? All of these things need to be considered by the director. How do you want it to look? Okay. All right. Do I have another one? Okay, and then after determining the concept, the director will work out a floor plan. Okay, this floor plan is not for a play. I couldn't read it very well. Engineering, oh, it looks like it's a floor plan for the Starship Enterprise. There's the shuttle bay or cargo bay, there's engineering, there's living quarters, transporter room, and sick bay, okay? Now our floor plan would look more like a stage, okay? It's a drawing of the stage marking exits, different levels, major furniture pieces, okay? And then the other thing they'll do, I typically create the prompt book as I go. A script that includes all the stage movements, entrances, exits, and special production notes. And there's a picture of one, okay? Let me do a quick thing here to show you what a floor plan might look like, okay? Typically, I will do this. Our stage looks pretty much like this, okay? This is the shape of it. Now, if I'm doing a floor plan, I will put okay, here's where the walls are, and we've got a wall angling this way, and right here, whoops, why did that do that? Right there is one of our doors, and here might be here's an opening with a staircase. So you would have walls, and you'd see a stairs. This is what one of our sets looked like. Sorry, those are terrible stairs. Never mind, let me erase those again. Okay, so your stairs would disappear okay? And there's an entryway with a back door that isn't seen by the audience. You might have a wall over here and a window. Okay, and this is the kitchen. Here's the door to the kitchen. All right. So then we might have furniture pieces, like we had a big table, okay, with chairs. And there might be a sofa or love seat here. And I believe there was a desk over here. And there was some kind of a chair or fainting couch here. Okay, so you would draw out these things. Where are they? Okay, where are they placed? This would be a floor plan. Not a very good one, but you get the idea, okay? And I would often, I'll have these drawn in, especially with the musical where we had people specifically placed. I'd have these, and when we were doing choreography and our choreographer, Miss Allison, was placing students, I'd be writing in who was standing where, okay? Like that with the name or something, all right? So back to shoot. Here we go. All right, so that would be a floor plan, okay? And then the prompt book is a script that, as I said, that includes all the stage movements, entrances, exits, and special production notes, okay? And this would often look like this. Now, what I would typically do, especially with the musical, I'd have things written in like this, and I would have pages with a floor plan and things like that drawn in, okay? So let me see. Do I have another? Selecting the cast. That's not in today's lesson. Okay. So we're just looking at the director's stuff and selecting the play. All right. That's all we're covering today. Tomorrow we'll cover what you do to go about selecting the cast. That's a separate lesson. Okay. So I have for you, and it's pretty close time to go. I have for you on Canvas, there is a set of questions. There's like 8 questions, I believe, for you to fill in. Maybe 6 questions, and one has 4 parts to it. I would like you to fill in those questions and submit them. Okay? I'm going to stop recording here. Tomorrow we'll talk about selecting the cast, and I can try, if